Hola Year 9, so we are continuing with our food topic today, but taking a break from learning food vocabulary to look at something called the present tense and being able to talk about, therefore, not just what I eat or what I hate to eat, but what other people do. Because we have done the present tense a little in class before in Year 9, but we now need to make sure we know it a bit better and can put it in different contexts. So the title, El Presente, I'm not talking about a present, but the present tense. You can put that in your books or your work area, wherever it is you're working, and today's date, or en casa. I'm en casa, so it's probably a jueves, a Thursday, or viernes, Friday that you're doing this, depending when your lesson is, and you can put the number of the date, and it's probably enero, January. And then the other thing today we're going to do as well as learning about the present tense, which is essential for us getting right to get up properly into level 6s. But also, if you go on to GCSE, it's essential to pass GCSE Spanish, knowing this. So we're getting a real head start now for those of you considering GCSE. And I hope lots of you are considering a language for GCSE. So we're considering Spanish. It's an excellent opportunity, and hopefully you will be watching or have watched the video about choosing languages with your options evening videos. If you want more information, please ask your teacher, and your teacher will have shared with you a video as well about language GCSEs and picking options. So if you haven't seen that, please ask for the link. That's another one that's different to what you were given for your options evening. So the second objective then, I was about to say, is that we're going to understand a bit more about food in Spain. Here's some typical Spanish foods here. And we're going to understand a little bit about how they eat and what they eat in Spain. It's very different and quite interesting, the times of day that they eat. Okay. So when you're ready to begin, let's start. So first of all, let's recap what we learnt about the present tense before. What is a verb? Tell me now. So hopefully you said it's a doing word or an action. So something that we do. So can you think very quickly to say some examples in English of verbs? So here's a couple: to chat or to dance. So maybe you thought of something like to eat, drink, jump, run, anything that is moving or action, or you're doing something. Even a verb like to be, that's a verb because I'm being, that's what the action would be. So in Spanish then, just like English, we use the present tense for these things. We covered this before Christmas. We use it to talk about what you're currently doing now. So like, I am listening to Mrs. Hilliard, that's what you're currently doing. Things that we normally do. So I go to the shops every day. I play football every week. I swim every Saturday. That's the present tense. And then facts. So telling me that I go to Pontelé school, that is a fact. We use the present tense for that. So it's used in loads of contexts. We can see we need to know how to use it to write a lot of different types of writing in Spanish. So we did learn how to form the present tense, and I wonder how much you remember. I wonder if any of this, me with different colour endings on these words, if any of it makes sense to you, what sort of patterns here you remember, or what any of these endings mean, or why there's different endings. Pause the video to have a little think, and let's see then what you know in a second. Okay, so maybe you remembered that because this part up here, practicar, means to do a sport, that it was this part here that means the to bit. So if I want to say I do, I can't simply put the word I before this. I in Spanish is yo, because that will mean I too do. So I have to change the endings to be about each person. So if we remember, this ending here means that it's I do. Practicas means that it's you do, if you're talking to one person who you know, being informal. Practica means he, she, or it does, or it even means you do if you're talking about somebody that you don't know, you're being quite formal. Okay, so all of the different endings match a different person. So it's the ending that tells me who does the action. It's like saying do I, do you, do he, she, do we. Although that sounds a bit weird, and that's not how we speak, that's what it sounds a little like in Spanish, because the ending is different for each person. So in other words, a recap of the present tense: you get your verb, I chop off this AR, because that's the bit that means to, and I've got to add a new set of endings. So these are just the AR endings, and there are two other types of verb in Spanish. So verbs in Spanish either end in AR, or there are two other types. So let's just recap overall the present tense. And you've got this in your books. If you don't have your book with you, there is a handout you can download with this information on to help you with today's work, or you can simply just keep following the video or the PowerPoint with it in. Or if you'd like to write down the steps again, you can, because that'll help them stick in your head, okay? But you don't have to, because we have written these down before. We're just recapping so we can put them in a new context of food and drink. So to form the present tense in Spanish, we find what we call the infinitive, the verb we want to use. So for example, estudiar means to study. So if I look up study in the dictionary, I will find to study. I can't just stick a person before it. To write, escribir. To eat is comer. All verbs will end in either AR, IR or ER in Spanish. They will not end in anything else. We call them AR verbs, IR verbs and ER verbs, depending what they end in. So I've got my verb, okay? If that verb still has that on the end, then it's going to mean estudiar, to eat, to study, or studying. To write or writing, to eat or eating, okay? So step 2 is getting rid of that bit that means to or ing, so that we can change the person. So step 1, get your verb. Step 2, take off the last 2 letters, which will leave us with what we call a stem. So this would leave with estudi. Then you add on your new ending. Okay, so we don't need I, you, he, she before the verb, although there are words in Spanish that mean those. I in Spanish is yo, you in Spanish is tú, he is él, and so on. We don't bother with the person before, because the end tells you the verb. So if I now wanted to say, I study, I take estudi, not the AR bit, estudi, and it's I. It's an AR verb because I took off AR, so it's estudio. All I verbs end in O anyway. All you verbs end in an S, but either have E for ER and IR verbs or A. He or she verbs then are just A or E. We verbs always end in mos with the letter that matches the verb. So AR, amos, ER, emos, IR, emos. You plural verbs always end in IS plus that letter. And then they verbs are the same as he or she, but we add an N to it. So an and in. Okay, so you can see some patterns there, the mos for each verb, O for each verb ending in S, and it's just the letter changes before, depending on if it's an AR, ER or IR verb. So what we're going to do now, this is the first thing you need to write down. So task 1, you're going to write down the person that is missing here in the English. I've just picked a few verbs. We're looking at eat and drink, that's from our topic. Hate, because you might talk about what foods you hate, and then just another common verb, speak. Okay, so what you need to do is look at the end of the verb to work out who is doing the action. So if we've got hablamos, I can see that it does not end in O. I can see that it ends in an S, but not AS or ES, it's OS, so it's not you. It doesn't end in A or E. Right, coming to the next one, I can now see mos, and I can see that it's amos, so therefore it used to be an AR verb, hablar. So amos is we. Okay, so I found the ending, and I know that means it's we speak. So do the same for all of these, and I want you to write out in your book or on a Word document or PowerPoint, up to you, 1 to 8, and write in the person that is missing. Okay? Pause the video to do that, and when you're ready to continue, then unpause. Okay, so we should have for number 1, I speak, because I can see that there is an O. All O verbs are I in Spanish. Comes, there's the ES there, so that's you eat if I'm talking to one person. Bebemos, there's another mos verb, so it's we. Odian, any verb ending in N is they, so they hate. Beben, so another one that ends in N, this time it was an ER verb, or it could have been an IR verb, but it's an ER verb, so it's they again, because it's N. Come, just ending in an E, means it's he or she. He eats. Hablais, as I can see that there, is you plural, if you're talking to a group of people. And then odio, the O ending, is I hate. Okay, now you're going to have a go for task 2 at putting the verbs into the correct present tense. So for example, and I want you to show how you work this out, we did something similar in class, but we're extending that a little today. So if we want to say we jump, so I've done step 1 for you, which is find the verb. Saltar means to jump. So I have to take off the bit that means to, A and R, which leaves me with salt, which we call our stem. Then I look in the grid and I find that we verbs end in amos, so I add that on the end, saltamos, we jump. Okay? What you're going to need to do as you do this is either have the grid in front of you in the Word download sheet, or you could have the grid in front of you on the slideshow that's below the video, or you'll have to keep rewinding the video to the grid, which would be a bit annoying for you. So the easiest way is to do have the worksheet open as well as the video, or have a look at the slideshow below the video. Just go onto the slide where the endings are, so you can have the video open as well as the slideshow. So there's 8 for you to do, so you need to put all these 8 into Spanish. Okay? See if you can show, at least for the first few, how you worked it out, just to help you work it out. Unpause when you're ready to check them. Okay, so I speak, if we know hablar is to speak, I take off the part that means to, that leaves me with hablo. Look in my grid and I verbs end in O, so hablo. Vivir, take off the part that means to, leaves me with bib. I look in the grid for IR verbs with we, which is ending as imos. So if you added amos on, vivamos, you've looked at the AR endings, and this is an IR verb, so the ending is a little different. Number 3, comer, to eat. Take off the bit that means to, leaves with com. In the grid, I can see that ER verbs for he and she is an E ending, come. Again, if you wrote coma, then you have used the AR endings, not the ER. Odiar is to hate. So I need to take off the part that means to, odi, and then I look in the grid for if you, when I'm talking to one person, singular, and the ending is as, so odias. Practicar, to do, take off the part that means do, add on, oh, don't know why that hasn't popped up there. Let's just come back to that one in a second. So you plural, escuchar, to listen. Haven't shown you the workings out here because you hopefully know the pattern now. It's escucháis. Now I've put in these two, I cry / I am crying, she runs / she is running. Because what we haven't actually talked about is that in Spanish, all of these mean two things. They mean I speak and I am speaking. We live and we are living. He eats and he is eating. So if you were a Spanish person learning English, you would have to learn two phrases for hablo. You'd have to learn it means I speak, and it learns I am speaking, means I am speaking. But in Spanish, hablo means both. So it makes it a lot easier for us. So I cry is lloro, and I'm crying is lloro. Corre, take off the bit that means to, add the E ending, the he, she ending, sorry. So therefore for he, she, we add an E, corre. And there's that one now. So practicar means to do, take off the bit that means to. They verbs end in an, so it's practican. So practican means they practice, or they do, and they are practicing. Okay, so you've had a good go at having a go at the present tense. So let's review what we know about it so far. So by the end of the lesson, you should be able to form regular verbs in the present tense following the 3 steps in your book, which you've just done. Okay, so if you used your book or your work area, you looked at the steps, you looked at the endings, you were getting most of those right, you've achieved our first objective. Okay, right, shut your books, or put aside your work area on your screen for the moment. Can you remember the steps to making a verb in the present tense off the top of your head at the moment? So pause the video, say them to yourself or write them down. Maybe you could even write down some of the endings if you already remember them, and then check again in a moment. Okay, so you should have something like find the infinitive of the verb, or if you didn't remember the word infinitive, maybe you've said or written down, get the verb with the AR, ER, IR end, or the bit that means to. Get rid of the last two letters, or take off the two-letter ending, get rid of the bit that means to. Add on a new ending from the table depending on who is doing the verb and what the ending was. Okay, and you can check if you've written down any of the endings, compare back with your notes from earlier, how many have you got right so far. So I wouldn't expect you to have learned all the endings off by heart by now, but you will be, by the end of GCSE, need to know them. So in the exam, if you're thinking, right, I want to say we something, you can go down the list in your head of what the endings are. And we always learn verbs in the same order. I, you, he, she, so the singular people first. We learn it first person, I, second person, you, third person, he, she, and then we do that again, first person, second person, third person, but the plurals. So we go I, you, he, she, we, you, plural, they. Okay, so if you know that order, you'll eventually get to the point where you can say the endings off by heart in your head. O, as, a, amos, ais, an are the endings for AR verbs. Okay, and once you can do that, it means in your head you can just count down the list and then add the right ending on in your writing. And the sooner you learn those off by heart, the easier you're going to find Spanish, because you can write anything in the present tense for every topic. Okay, but like I said, this is our first refresher lesson on it. You won't have learned all the endings off by heart now, obviously. Okay, so we've done step 2 as well then, be able to recall the 3 steps. Okay, and see if you can still do that at the end of the lesson. So we're going to see now if you're able to form verbs in the present tense using only the ending table for reference. So don't look at the 3 steps. Can you write any verbs down by just using the table? Okay, so I'm going to keep the table there for you, but we can't see the 3 steps. You're just using that. I'm going to put an infinitive verb up on the screen with a person that I want you to write, and I just want you to list down your answers in your exercise book or work area. Okay, if we were in a lesson, we'd probably write these on whiteboards and hold them up, but obviously we can't do that now. Okay, so first of all, in your books, please write down we speak. So there's the infinitive, hablar. Use the table, write down we speak. You might want to pause. Yeah, pause it after I say each one, so you've got time to write it down, then unpause. So pause now. Okay, so hopefully you've written down hablamos, so correct it in a different colour. So you should have taken off the AR. I know in this column, because it's an AR, it's we, so I add back on amos, hablamos. Okay, can you please write down you go out if you're talking to one person? Let's go the informal way if you just know that person. So pause, write that down. So hopefully you wrote down sales, okay, because it's an IR verb, talking to you. So take off the IR and I add ES. Comer is to eat. Can you please write down she eats? Pause. Okay, hopefully you've written down come, because I take off the ER, she, in the ER column I add an E on. Can you please write down I write? Pause now. Hopefully you've written down escribo. We know that I verbs in the present always end in O. Write down you live if you're talking to a group, so plural if you're talking to a group of people. So hopefully you've written down bibis. And there is an accent on here because it tells you to put the emphasis there. So rather than pronouncing it bibis, it's bibis. Okay. How would you say I react? Hopefully you've written down reacciono. So I take off the AR and I add my O. How would you say they pack? They pack their bag. Hopefully you have empacan. And how would you say you play if you're talking to a group of people? Hopefully you've written down jugáis. Okay, we're going to take a little brain break from our present tense grammar there to do a little bit of culture. Now it's really important, like I said at the start of the lesson, that we learn about the culture of the country as well as just the language, to get a real flavour of what Spanish is like in Spain. Okay, we'll sometimes touch on the culture of South America as well, because obviously most of South America speaks Spanish. But we're just looking at Spain today. So I contacted my friend from Spain. Her name is Blanca, and she wrote down a really detailed account of a general day of how Spanish people structure their day around their meals. Okay, so I'm not going to read through all of this. You can read it for yourself at your own speed. Please do read it all though, because at the end of the lesson you're going to complete an interactive quiz on Moodle and see how much of the culture of Spain you have learnt in regards to food. So I'm going to put up all of the information. There's a couple of slides. She's written plenty of detail for us, and I'm just going to touch on one or two things in there to help you understand a couple of aspects. Okay, so pause as often as you need to read, or you can read it all afterwards on the Google Slides below the video. Okay, so she's talking here about breakfast. You might be surprised about what you learn about with their breakfast, and with it they have something called café con leche. So hopefully you remember that is coffee with milk. Okay, and then she goes on then to talk about their real breakfast a little bit later on, and she mentions in here something called tortilla. Now, when you hear of a tortilla, usually you will think of a wrap, okay, a tortilla wrap. But Spanish tortilla, so they do eat tortilla wraps, but when you say a Spanish tortilla, so in Spanish they call it tortilla española, that's actually an omelette, okay, which looks like this. Okay, it's a big fat omelette with lots of potatoes in, sometimes with peas and ham and things in. And they might have a slice of that. And then this is called pan con tomate, which is literally bread with tomatoes. So what they will do is get bread and rub olive oil on it and spread like mashed up or chopped up tomatoes. Okay, I know in Catalonia, Catalonia, they'll sometimes rub garlic on it first as well. So they don't tend to eat sliced bread like us. Okay, they often in Spain and France refer that bread to, they call it American sandwich bread, because bread for them is baguette, not just sliced bread. Okay, they'll eat really like nice rustic breads usually. Okay, so read all that about breakfast and mornings. And then she goes on to talk about lunch. Now the day is very different to ours. Okay, they have a very long lunch hour. Something they might have in their main meal might be this here, paella, or we call it, and in Spanish pronounced paella. Often it is seafood based, but it doesn't always have to be. Okay, and they have something in each restaurant called a menú del día, which is which means menu of the day. So rather than looking at the normal menu and choosing anything, they'll have a fixed menu where you've got a limited amount of starter choices and a limited amount of mains, or it might be you might have a main and a dessert instead for a fixed price. Okay, so have a little read of all of that about how their long lunch hours. And then she goes on to talk about what happens just after that and in schools. So you might have heard of the word siesta, which means a nap. Okay, so they will often have a nap in Spain, usually just children and older people. So some of the reasons here, so avoid the midday heat, limit working hours, enjoy the late night lifestyle, which you'll learn about in a moment, have a long lunch, enjoy a healthy afternoon nap. Because obviously Spain is very hot, so if they're working right through that hottest part of the day, it's often very difficult. So their structure of the day is very different to ours. They will have this long lunch hour where they have their main meal, they might have a siesta, or they might do some shopping like she says, or do some other things, and then they go back to work in the afternoon or back to school. Okay, and she talks a little bit about school here. They will have a 3-course meal if they stay in school that might look something like this. Okay, and you'd be surprised at what time school finishes, because obviously they have that long lunch break in the middle and a siesta, and they might go home. The day is split up, unlike here. Okay, then around 6 o'clock later on, they have something called a merienda, so that's a snack. So you can read a little bit about what they do there. And there's a couple of words I've pulled out here for you. So jamón serrano is this here. You can buy sometimes these big ham legs in Lidl and Aldi when they have Spanish weeks on. And then there's this massive leg of cured meat. There's something cooked, it's been like cured. And on a stand, and then they slice off slices. And you might have heard of chorizo. Most people here want to pronounce it chorizo, which can be spicy or not. There's loads of different types of chorizo we can get here, so do try some. It's delicious on pizza, or just eaten raw, whatever you prefer. It's cured meat. Okay. Talks a little more about children here and their merienda, and then a lot of people then will go for a paseo, which is go for a walk. So this is up down the streets. This might look like this. This might be a typical pastry and coffee they might have with their merienda. Okay, another interesting thing then is about Spanish people and dressing up with their clothes. So have a read of that part there. Okay, and then you probably heard of tapas. So this is now talking about evening meals. Might be surprised to hear how late they eat, because of course remember they've had their day stretched out to avoid the midday heat of working and shops being open in the midday heat and things. Very often then they're closed, so their day is stretched out longer. You might go to Spain and go out at about 1 or 2 in the afternoon expecting to go to some shops, and you might find a lot of them are shut because they've shut in the middle heat of the day to have their long lunch, to have their siesta, but then they're open much later into the evening. So prime time TV doesn't usually start till like 10:30. So if you're sitting down to watch the soaps or whatever, they'll be on very late because the day ends so late, everything is stretched out. Okay, so have a read of that in more detail. And again, talks here about how late they go for food. I was very surprised on one of my first trips to Spain to be out with my family, and we were sitting in a restaurant outside. Looked probably a little bit like this actually. A lot of restaurants that people eat outside here because it's still so lovely and warm in the evening. And we were finishing our food around about 8 o'clock, maybe close to 9, which is late for us anyway as Brits. And there were people arriving with children at that time to start eating. It seemed really strange for us, but it makes sense because of what you will learn about the rest of their day. Okay, so like I said, at the end of the lesson, go and complete the cultural quiz about this just to see how much and help you relearn all this knowledge, because there is a module in the GCSE called Festivals and Celebrations and learning about Spanish food, and you're expected to know a little bit about their culture, and the more you know, the easier it'll be to answer questions that are in Spanish about things like this, because you've already got the knowledge in English. Okay, right, let's jump back then to our present tense grammar. So we had a little go at forming the verbs just using the table for reference, but we're going to do something now called conjugation to finish off. Okay, so conjugating basically means putting a verb into all its forms. So for example, the verb escribir means to write, and then if I was going to conjugate it, I do this. So basically I've taken off the IR and I added all the right endings. So I've written down in Spanish, I write, you write, he or she writes, we write, you write plural, they write. Always in that order. Okay, so escribo, escribes, escribe, escribimos, escribís, escriben. Okay, so what I want you now to do is pause the video and conjugate an AR verb, an ER verb, and an IR verb. So you will end up with 3 lists. You could conjugate more if you want. The more you practice, the more those endings are going to stick in your head. So pick a verb from each column, or think of your own infinitive, or find a different one we've done before. And I want you in your work area or book to conjugate those verbs, and I'll mark them then when I see them. Okay, or if you feel confident, you can have a go at marking it yourself. It's always better to self-mark first, because you can see immediately where you've made the mistakes, as opposed to me marking it in a few days' time, and you might, by then, you might not even look back at it properly, or you've forgotten what you were writing about. Okay, so have a look at your grid table after to see if you got them right. Now you can use the grid table to do this, or see initially how much you can do from memory, because that really does help learn better by testing yourself first. Okay, so you should now have 3 verbs or more written out in their full list: I, you, he, she, we, you, they. Okay, so the present then, el presente. Not unfortunately getting a present, it's tense. Okay, the most important tense really, because it's going to touch on every single topic. So I don't know how you are now feeling about the present tense. Hopefully you feel you know what you're doing. You could at least do that first thing of following all the steps and putting a verb in. perhaps you know you can recall all those steps, and maybe you feel confident that you already know some endings off by heart. Okay, so before next week, make sure that you submit all of these tasks now in the assignment Dropbox that you've done today, so I can see your understanding of the present tense. You're going to have a go at that cultural quiz in a moment.